Hello, everybody. I'm Charles Laughlin from BIA Kelsey, and I'm here with my two colleagues, Mike Boland. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Charlie.
And Abid Chaudhry.
Folks, how's it going?
All right, so we're doing a roundtable today, kind of talking about some of the developments in the local digital, social, mobile, et cetera, space going on currently. Abid, today you were reading up on Apple's earnings announcement, and you were sort of blown away by their profitability and what it means. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. One of the interesting things that happened yesterday was that Apple came out with their most recent quarterly earnings report, and it basically blew everyone out of the water. And that includes both the pundits, the analysts, as well as pretty much every competitor of any corporation in the universe, because they came out with $74.6 billion for the quarter, and that led to $18 billion in profit in just one quarter itself. Now, if you think about what that means in the context of corporate history, there's only been 20 companies that have really gotten to the above 16, above 15 billion in profit per quarter in the last 50, 60 years or 100 years of keeping track of this stuff. And 15 of those companies are oil and gas companies. The other 5 are all Apple. And for that matter, Apple has actually put themselves into a situation where by pushing almost 75 million iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus devices into the market, of really getting themselves nice and primed for the Apple Watch that's going to be coming out. They just announced it's going to be coming out in April now. There's a lot of different ways that we could slice this in terms of the local or the mobile or the social story, but there's a couple places where I really thought were interesting. One of them was that the majority of these phones and the majority of these devices and the majority of the revenue that came from Apple in yesterday's report came from Southeast Asia and specifically from China. And what that means to me is that Apple is really pushing in earnest into the Asian marketplace. They've eclipsed both Samsung as well as Xiaomi, who are the primary 2 device manufacturers in China, to become the #1 device manufacturer. And that's a pretty phenomenal thing to show for in the Asian market, where oftentimes we see Asian products and Asian brands taking over the top spot. Now, one of the things that I kind of feel is going to happen next is come April, May, and maybe by the summer, we're going to see a lot of interest in the Apple Watch. And estimates are showing that we're going to see probably 20 or 30 million devices sold in the next quarter after the watch gets released. And there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about this in the local angle. But I think for now, the most exciting part is to see Apple make a huge bet on going with big screens, something that the American marketplace said wasn't going to fly, and effectively show everyone that they knew exactly what they were doing. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
So, Mike, Facebook is coming out with its earnings. You wanted to talk about some trends around that.
Sure, and it actually relates to Apple in some ways. And one other quick note on Apple is that there was really strong iPhone 6 Plus growth. And of all their hardware, that's actually where the strongest margins lie. And also the international angle relates to what I'm going to say. A lot of Facebook's kind of future growth is happening overseas because it's plateauing in the US. So anyway, Facebook actually today announces Q4 and full year earnings, and they'll probably post this before this roundtable airs. So any comments here would be speculative. But there are still a few things worth talking about using the kind of Facebook event as really an excuse to talk about some important things that they are currently going through in terms of positioning. And I'm going to go over 2 of them briefly. So one, the background is that Facebook really turned a corner a few years ago when it was able to gain the confidence of public markets by reporting that the majority of ad revenue was coming from mobile ads. And since then, that number has slowly escalated. And in its last quarterly earnings, it was up to about 66%, which is about $2 billion in revenue. And the reason that's important is that Facebook's usage growth mostly lies with mobile. And again, especially in emerging markets because it's plateauing in the US. So what it has to do really is prove that it can monetize that traffic as well or better than desktop, which it's really been able to do so far.
So on the sort of theme of the cross-device theme, I want to know one thing. A company that we follow in the SMB space, YP, just came out with something called, eponymously named cross-device targeting, which is product about cross-device targeting, essentially the ability to follow a search with messaging, with consistent messaging that begins, say, on a desktop, and it continues in a mobile device or within an app, and be able to sort of consistently follow that single use, essentially, through with consistent messaging, which obviously increases the effectiveness of advertising considerably. And it's a big thing that brands want to be able to do, and YP needed to sort of get into that game to be able to enable that for the big brands that they're working with. But I think it's also interesting that this whole idea of cross-device targeting, when you get into a company like YP offering it, may have some implications for sort of enabling, the SMB to sort of play in that game, because that's the lion's share of where YP plays. They have 500,000, give or take, small business customers. So it's an interesting potential there for, again, sort of in this bigger theme of what used to be the exclusive domain of big brands or big enterprises increasingly being enabled for small businesses. That's not where they're starting with this, but I think maybe that's where they're going.
And Charlie, what I think is interesting about that, and the YP announcement this week of cross-device retargeting and targeting being sort of perfect for the timing for Facebook's earnings tonight or today, is that we're all moving towards this notion of using the mobile as the hub for the primary sort of advertising mechanism. And one of the things I'll be curious to see with Facebook in the next couple of weeks, to Mike's points from earlier, are what are they going to do with this local ad awareness initiative? This whole notion of they've created almost like an AdWords type product that allows for the demographic profiling that Facebook allows, like the gender, the social network, the propensity towards certain colleges or whatever. And being able to use that as an extra layer for location-based advertising, which is a cousin to the stuff that YP is going to be working on with cross-device targeting, which is really about, like you said, getting away from that core search and getting to where the user or the consumer actually is looking at their ad, which oftentimes, to Mike's point from earlier, is on the mobile device. And so we're starting to see these big players starting to move towards geolocation and demographic targeting as the sort of primary mechanism, even in local, which is a big deal.
I'll add one thing to that, and related to all of this is in both what YP and Facebook are doing is the offline attribution for further kind of closing the loop and iterating on what worked and what didn't work. So Facebook actually announced last week some new data partnerships to better close that loop. So far, it's been working with Datalogics and others to really extrapolate some A/B testing around how that offline attribution ties back to how effective ads were.
How tight is that attribution once you go offline? I mean, is it inferred? Is it?
Yep, there are a few different methodologies. The holy grail is going to be mobile payments, because that really kind of closes the loop on a pretty it's hard to disprove if a purchase happened when you're talking about a mobile payment. Otherwise, the methodologies are largely extrapolated using A/B testing, using different kind of census data, everything from purchase lifts among a sample group or a control group. Versus an independent group in kind of a typical A/B testing fashion.
So I guess that'll wrap up our analyst roundtable for this time around, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.